our speaker today is Jonathan Shapiro. Jonathan's many things. He's a former U.S. attorney, he's a law professor, he's a practicing attorney, and he's a screenwriter and producer of some of the television's most iconic programs, including The Blacklist, one of my favorites, The Practice, Life, Boston Legal, and more recently Goliath, a legal thriller on Amazon Prime. But I want to focus on two other achievements. First, of course, he is the playwright of Sisters-in-Law, a play about the relationship between Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which that show will be premiering, and it will be the world premiere of that show this coming Friday, a week from tonight. And it is the hope and expectation of everybody connected with the theater that that show will make its way to Broadway. Second, he is the author of a variety of books, including Lawyers, Liars, and the Art of Storytelling. Kind of sounds like something John O'Connor might have written or would certainly read if he were around to read it. One critic described it as showing the reader how to get their message across using great stories, quote, part how-to manual, part memoir, and always entertaining. In that book, he makes the following observation about Justice O'Connor. On March 13, 2014, in an appearance in Los Angeles, Sandra Day O'Connor recalled Justice Thurgood Marshall's constant use of storytelling to advocate among his fellow justices. No one else told better, more relevant law stories, O'Connor remembered, or had more life experience to draw from. When Marshall retired, O'Connor said she missed the stories, and so did other justices. Since she retired from the court, Justice O'Connor, in books and lectures, has been trying to pick up the slack. And that resonates well with our program today and why we're here. So on that note, please join me in welcoming Jonathan Shapiro to the lectern. Thank you. I'll take my copy of the book with me.
So I want you all to enjoy Wyatt Earp on April 6th. I guess you won't be going to the play on April 6th, however, because that's the same time, but I understand. I also have to say that this is the first time I've had the opportunity to speak to a group of Rotarians since I came in second in the Southern California debate contest in 11th grade. I want you to know that I'm over it. Through a tremendous amount of personal development, I forgive you all. No, it was the woman who won probably deserved it. I also have to mention that the last time I came to Arizona, it was for a very unpleasant reason, which was my youngest son had to go to the Mayo Clinic, and so we were here a number of days. And a little bit scary time. So to come back here and to be able to announce that today he's completely healthy and he's just announced where he's going to college is a great blessing. And finally, I have to tell you, there's a German word for everything, but there's a German word for nostalgia for a place you've never been. Fenwa is the term. It's sort of related to wanderlust, but it's a notion that you long for some place that you've read about or heard about but never actually been. Well, I can't and I won't fully explain to you why I have that feeling about Rotary 100. But if you go to the play, you'll see why. This club figures into the play. Because I think Rotary, in its concept of service above self, very much embodies the two women that I'm writing about in Sisters-in-Law, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor. Early in my research, I became fascinated by the great John O'Connor. A man I wish I had known. A man who I think would have liked the book. I love stories more than anything. The reason I became a newspaper reporter for 3 years and then a federal prosecutor was because, like Abraham Lincoln, who said that one can find the best stories in a courtroom, I found enough material in my almost 10 years as a trial lawyer to now be approaching 20 years as a TV writer. But I have to say, in honor of our newest member, Mr. Prouty, and also in the spirit of John O'Connor, I have to share something with you, which is Mr. and Mrs. Moskowitz decided to go on a cruise for their anniversary. And they were having a wonderful time until Mr. Moskowitz fell off the ship. 10 years later, the Coast Guard finds Mr. Moskowitz on a deserted desert island. And he's built an entire city out of bamboo. And he's giving the captain of the ship a tour of his city. This is the city hall. This is the public school. This is a synagogue. This is another synagogue. The captain says, "You're the only one here. Why do you need two synagogues?" Mr. Moskowitz says, "Do you see this one? This one I don't go to." Had I the ability to do a brogue, I would have done a brogue story, but I feel that Mr. O'Connor might have appreciated it. I belong to a club in Los Angeles called the Jonathan Club, which is not named for me, but Justice O'Connor was the recipient of our service award for the year in 2007, and she was not able to attend because of health issues, but she did make a lovely video. And my friend is the one who actually went and talked to her and interviewed her. And my friend was telling me last week that when Justice O'Connor was given the list of the prior winners, my friend was a little nervous because she looked down the list and was clearly not impressed. Ronald Reagan, Neil Armstrong, Walter Cronkite, John Wooden, nothing. And then she got to Arnold Palmer and let out a big whoop and said, "Oh, this is a good award." So I want to address three things that I would be thinking if I were in your place having to listen to this. One thing I want to address is I would be wondering, who the heck are you to think that you should write a play about these two icons? Secondly, what the play is about. And third, why I think it matters. So let me start with who I am. I am the, like the O'Connors who are here, blessed to have been raised by two wonderful parents. My father was a furniture salesman and my mother was a bank teller at B of A for 40 years. And I hope she's the last of that generation who got accepted into UCLA and didn't go because her father forbade it. There was that time. And my grandfather, immigrant from Lublin, didn't feel that women should work. My mother, in many ways, reminds me of Justice O'Connor and Justice Ginsburg. My mother, and I know something about this because I prosecuted a number of bank robberies as an assistant U.S. attorney. My mother was the victim teller in 4 bank robberies. Now, Debbie Shapiro, who looks a little bit like Jackie Onassis if Jackie Onassis was Jewish, try to get your head around that concept. Is a very sweet, kind, generous woman. She was held up at gunpoint 2 of the 4 times. She always identified the robber. The last time, my mother was one of 12 witnesses, and she said that the bank robbers were not black like the other witnesses said. My mother said they were white men wearing makeup. Now, I must tell you, Debbie Mandelblatt Shapiro has had an issue with the FBI since the Rosenbergs. Too soon? Is it too soon? So when the FBI agent came over to our house and tried to convince my mother that she was wrong, my father, who's been married to my mom now for 63 years, said, "Agent Watson, don't bother. You won't convince her that she's wrong." 2 weeks later, the FBI arrested the robbers with bait bills and with the gun and the makeup. And in fact, they were white guys wearing makeup. I could imagine Justice O'Connor Justice Ginsburg, not being moved off of what they believe is right. And so I was fortunate enough to have a father and mother who taught me the value of stories, who taught me the value of theater as a way to teach civic virtues as the Greeks understood it. I was blessed to be able to go to the public schools of Los Angeles when those were the finest schools anywhere. And I was taught rhetoric by Mrs. Berkowitz, who is the person who really informed my desire to be a writer. I was a graduate of Harvard, I was a Rhodes Scholar, and I announced to my parents that I wanted to be a writer full-time. I don't know if you know the concept of Shiva. It's something you... My father got on a plane and must not have paid the lowest fare, which by itself is stunning, and flew to Oxford to tell me that if I did not go to law school and get a profession, he would never speak to me again. Fathers did that sort of thing even when I was a kid. And so I said, it's a very bad thing you're doing. You know, I'll have resentments for you my whole life. He said, you're already crazy. It won't make any difference. And so I took my father up on it, and I went to Berkeley Law School for the simple reason that Berkeley was pass-fail. And I worked full-time as a newspaper reporter at the San Francisco Recorder newspaper. And on one day, I took constitutional law, where we read a case written by Justice Blackmun, and on that same day, I interviewed Justice Blackmun, who was speaking in San Francisco. What happened to me could only happen in a story, which is I took a trial advocacy course in law school, taught by 2 public defenders in Oakland, and I decided I should probably try a case or 2 before I become a writer. I immediately was fortunate to be hired in the honors program of the Justice Department, where the man taking the oath of office next to me at the Patrick Henry Building in 1990, fellow member of the honors class, 1990, was a guy named Rod Rosenstein. Oh, do you know Rod? I don't know what happened to him. For years, I had shows that I developed that got canceled, and I'd feel terrible about my show being canceled, and I'd think to myself, boy, Rod Rosenstein's a smart guy. Got a safe job, nobody knows who he is. At any rate, I am someone who was fortunate enough to go into politics, to become the chief of staff for the Lieutenant Governor of California. Had Al Gore won, I would have been Undersecretary of the Interior. We probably would have been indicted. Another reason to thank your mother. Thank you so much. Thank you. When President Bush was elected and Al Gore was not, I had an option to return to the U.S. Attorney's Office, pursue a partnership at the small public law firm Latham & Watkins, or I didn't know what to do. I wanted to go into politics and run for office, and my wife said that she would leave me, so I didn't. But she said, you know, if you could sell a script, we could get into the Writers Guild, the 2 of us. My wife wrote on Roseanne originally, and the new Roseanne. She also wrote on Friends. It's too bad she's not here. She's actually funny. She is, among other things, the woman who wrote the lyrics to the song Smelly Cat. So thank you very much. At any rate, I wrote a script in order to get into the Guild for insurance purposes, and her agent got me a meeting with a fellow named David E. Kelley. David E. Kelley created some of the greatest shows, LA Law and so forth, and married to Michelle Pfeiffer, captain of the Princeton hockey team, what we would call in my culture a Gentile. And apparently a term you're not unfamiliar with. So Ms. Kelley and I met, and he said, did anything funny ever happen to you in court? I said, well, yeah. The first defendant I ever prosecuted at trial, his last name was Outlaw. which I thought was kind of odd. And the judge, as a judge will, said, after introducing the voir dire panel to the lawyers, does anybody know any of the parties in this case? And an elderly woman from Anacostia, I was in D.C. Superior Court, this was an attempted murder case, raised her hand and said, I know Mr. Shapiro, and he knows me. And I said, I've never seen this woman in my life, Your Honor. And the judge said, how do you know Mr. Shapiro? And the potential juror said, I've been paying rent to Mr. Shapiro for 35 years. And nothing is fixed in the apartment. There are cockroaches, there are rats, and he never fixes anything. And the judge said, ma'am, I'm sure there are a lot of slumlords named Shapiro. But this one is not yours. And then invited me to exercise one of my strikes. So Kelly said, yeah, okay, write that. And that became my first script. And since then, I've been very fortunate to continue writing. I once actually, Goliath is a good example. It stars Billy Bob Thornton and William Hurt, and it won the Golden Globe, and I think it's a terrific show. We pitched them a story idea for it, and the president of Amazon, Mr. B, it came back to us that he said, well, this story is not believable. It wouldn't happen. So I brought him the trial transcript where it happened. And word came back to us that Mr. B said, okay, it happened. But just because something happened doesn't mean it's true. So this is the world we live in now. The play is about the two most important attorneys of my lifetime. The two attorneys who became justices of the Supreme Court, and in their careers and in their lives are responsible for the greatest and most important changes in our society of anyone. I was fortunate enough to get to know Justice O'Connor through the National Association of Women Judges. I was serving on a panel for the California State Supreme Court. I met a number of women justices who told me that state judicial elections had become incredibly political, that certain political sides are spending tens of millions of dollars to elect state justices on state Supreme Court that they feel will be more pro-business, that this is an unusual situation. And one of the first people to talk publicly about it and to be concerned about it was Justice O'Connor. By the way, a courageous stance for a woman who didn't need the aggravation, who could have gone through the rest of her life simply receiving the awards and the accolades she deserved, but who stepped up on behalf of other women judges in particular for an impartial judiciary. So I said to the National Association of Women Judges, I will write a film, I'll write it and I'll produce it, that will be a public service announcement, that will explain to the electorate what judges do and why judicial elections should be about who the most fair judge is rather than whose political side they're on. And I'll do that if you get Justice O'Connor to do the narration. And the word came back that Justice O'Connor said, absolutely not. Because obviously, a woman like Justice O'Connor, a person in that position, cannot be involved in political activity. So I went up to the San Francisco Bar Association where she was speaking a month later, and I made my pitch. And now, here's the thing about Justice O'Connor, and my mother as well. She has a look that could actually toast bread. And she gave me that look. But I explained to her that this would be nonpartisan in every possible way, that literally I had permission to use a quote from To Kill a Mockingbird. I had a script that she would obviously have approval of. And anyone on any political side could use it for free to educate as a pedagogical device. And she said, well, there may be an exception. And I got to go to the Thurgood Marshall Media Center in Washington, D.C. And I've worked with wonderful actors, Academy Award winners, male and female. I have never been involved with an actress who knew her lines better.
One take, right?
One take. Justice O'Connor had it pitch perfect. Now, here's the fascinating thing about the great Justice O'Connor. She said, could we do it again? Because I think the lighting isn't as good as it should be. Thereby proving that all great actors know what their lighting is. And that film was used by the women justices of the Kansas State Supreme Court who had been targeted, in large part because of gender, to be recalled and thrown off the court. And 6 months ago, I had the pleasure of speaking to the Kansas State Bar and meeting those justices, all of whom were retained and who gave Justice O'Connor's film credit. So, like Evan Thomas, who I spoke with last week and whose book I'm reviewing for the LA Review of Books, I too have fallen in love with Justice O'Connor. It's kind of impossible not to. No author would create her as a character. It wouldn't be believable. Even though it's true that she existed, it's hard to believe. She is in law what we call sui generis, a thing unto herself. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, subject of an Academy Award documentary, very popular, a lovable woman in some ways. Justice Ginsburg, I feel I know. You couldn't be raised by Deborah Mandelblatt Shapiro and not know Justice Ginsburg, the brilliance of the woman. But as Justice Ginsburg herself has acknowledged, had Sandra Day O'Connor not been the first, Ruth Bader Ginsburg never would have been appointed. And if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had been first, we can only wonder. The play is about their relationship. Because as a dramatist, as a playwright, what I'm interested in is how human beings interact with one another to resolve conflict. We live in an age, and this is the last part, why I think this play matters. We're living at a time and an age where we seem to be having a bit of a tough time talking to people who don't agree with us. There was a play written about Justices Blackmun and Chief Justice Burger. And the play was about the fact that, as you may know, when they were called the Minnesota Twins, those two men grew up together, literally as children. And by the time they were done serving on the court, they loathed each other. They could not square the differences that they had. They did not know how to resolve conflict. Women are different. These women are different. By the way, I'm laughing because I gave this speech once when my dad was there, and he clapped too, and my mother hit him. I was interested in understanding how these two women dealt with being the first women of power, equal to men, capable finally of writing a Supreme Court opinion. To think that for the entire history of our nation, a woman could never write the story of the law, the story of their lives. Because if you can't write a Supreme Court opinion, you will never write the story of our country, of our law. And so I wanted to explore how these two women, as women, negotiated differences as a way to explore how all of us might do better. Somebody has seen the play, oh, my son, actually, I guess I can out him. My son sat through a read-through. He said, it's really funny. He said, it's like the Odd Couple of law. And I said, we only hope that it runs that long. But the truth is, I find conflict to often be the source of great humor. Being a federal prosecutor, handling death penalty appeals, handling attempted murder cases, terrorism cases, Russian mafia cases, you wouldn't think those would be sources of humor, any more than you would think that a medical unit in Korea would be the source of humor. Humor is our way, I think, of bringing empathy and humanity to even the worst situations. Like my mother, I don't think Justice O'Connor necessarily could tell a joke like John O'Connor. My mother has never been able to tell a joke. God forbid you suggest she doesn't have a sense of humor, however. The more you know about Ruth and Sandra, the more you realize how funny they are, sometimes even intentionally. And so I would love to open it up for questions, but I want to leave you with one thought. When you see the play, know that everything in it is true. The case that forms the center of their discussions existed. It happened. The argument they had, the dates, the final scene in D.C., these things all happened. I'd like to say that I'm a creative person, but you know what? I'm not creative enough to have created what these two were to one another. The blonde and the brunette, the New Yorker versus the Westerner, the Jew versus the Christian, the extrovert versus the introvert, the politician versus the academic. They were the oddest of couples. And the fact that they worked together and the fact that they respected one another, even when they didn't necessarily like each other, I hope is an example for all of us. So with that, if anyone has a rebuttal, I'd love to hear it. It seems as if the first question should go to a family member.
I've got a pitch for you. Husbands-in-law, about John O'Connor and Marty Ginsburg. They really enjoyed each other, and when I watched the documentary on RBG and learned how parallel Dad and Marty were in their careers, I was just dumbstruck.
You know what, I first of all, thank you, and thank you for your family, which is such a marvelous family for our country. And you know, we live in a time when legacies and dynasties like the Adams and the Bushes, the Kennedys, maybe we don't thank the family enough. I adore your mother. I adore what she has been for our country. I can tell you that when she was appointed to the court, my mother wept. The idea that a woman could be on the court, easy to forget how shocking that was. Easy to forget what a courageous thing that was for President Reagan. I grew up in a household where I actually thought the man's name was that son of a bitch Nixon. So for me to say that, I too found one of the most moving parts of writing the play, how similar the two women were. First of all, there's only a 3-year age difference. How similar their legal training was, their employment history, how Ruth in particular evolved to the position she's in. You know, when Ruth was asked in law school by the dean, how do you justify taking the place of a qualified man? Wow. Justice Ginsburg said, well, I think it's important that a wife knows what her husband does. Justice O'Connor never answered like that. I'll also tell you, and Evan Thomas and I spoke, and it was like getting to look at each other's exam papers, because we've both obviously done a lot of research.
Not everyone might know who Evan Thomas is.
Thank you very much. Oh, God, finally I've been interrupted by O'Connor. I'd always wanted it at the court, but no, that's fine. Evan Thomas is the author of, I think, the 3 greatest legal biographies of the last 30 years. He wrote The Man to See about Edward Bennett Williams, great trial lawyers and political fixtures of our age. He wrote a tremendous biography of Robert Kennedy, and he is the author of First, which is, I think, the best biography that has ever been or will ever be written about Justice O'Connor. One thing that I have to say before I get to the husbands, in my review of Thomas's book, I said it's wrong, in a sense, to think of Justice O'Connor in political terms, right, left. She was a Westerner. I'm third generation California, and I can tell you that when I went from Southern California to Harvard, and the guy, I rode crew, and I was the fourth seat. The fifth seat was the guy who came in third at the Rotary Fellowship from Long Beach. We always used to joke that, you know, if we had won that thing, we might have made something of ourselves. It is a huge, we are still a country of region. And she was part Annie Oakley and part Puccini's Golden Girl of the West. There is the romance of the West to Sandra Day O'Connor that is extraordinary, and if you are from this area, you get it. That sense of self-reliance, that sense of space. And so I think the husbands, in a way, now I have to say, I wish I'd met your father because of his San Francisco heritage. My father's business partner for 30 years was Bob Quinn and Shapiro. Bob Quinn taught me how to sing all 3 verses of the Rose of Tralee, and then would take me to Cole's Bar on St. Patrick's Day and put me on the bar, and I would sing it for money. Until my mother found out, and that was that. Bob Quinn was a San Franciscan, and there is a type of human being like that is, quite frankly, magical. Marty Ginsburg, of course, who did the cooking and was a real charming, funny guy. This is a 2-woman play. By the way, if whoever spent the money, I hope you know, it's just 2 people. If there's a money-back guarantee on the tickets. We don't have a huge cast. There was a moment when I was going to write a 4-hander with the husbands. And the problem with that is I don't ever want anyone to think I did anything but focus on these 2 women. Because in the canon of American drama, you cannot cite a play in which 2 powerful women negotiate about law or anything else in the public realm. The dramaturge that's worked on this play did a lot of research. Shakespeare never wrote it. It's time that drama catch up with the rest of society. I hope that Sister-in-Law becomes one of those plays that people look back on and say, you know, that was the first play in the Western canon that presented women in positions of stately power. It does not exist. And that's why. Now, the other question is, and you would know better than I, there are people who say that Martin Ginsburg had a wonderful sense of humor. And there are people who say that John O'Connor had a wonderful sense of humor. What I'm interested in, and I have never really been able to discover is, well, was it the same humor? Was one more of a storyteller? Was one more of a joker? That's interesting to me. What I do know is that both women, like my wife and my father and all the Shapiros who've ever married, know, I believe the wives were tolerant of their husband's humor. Your laugh says so much. Are there any other questions?
What do you ascribe to the recent fascination with RBG over the last couple of years?
Well, the play, here's what's great about being a prosecutor or a newspaper reporter or a playwright. You get to learn things that you didn't know. You get to change your opinions on things. I have to say that my opinions of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor changed over the course of writing the play. There's a famous quote by Cocteau that theater is the lie that tells the truth. Right? This is not a transcript of an event. It's not a trial. It's a dramatic interpretation of these two lives. Shakespeare didn't know Richard, but he seemed to capture something that was compelling, that told us more about Richard than anything could. In that sense, I think, famous, powerful people tell us more about ourselves than themselves. Our feelings about Ruth Bader Ginsburg reflect more, I think, about us at this moment than it does about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg is much more fascinating, much more tragic than might be suggested by a caricature on a T-shirt. And yet, she has become a caricature on a T-shirt. Why? What is the significance of that? I was taught in rhetoric that a visual polemic can be just as expressive as the written word. Picture tells 1,000 words. The caricature of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, to me, and I hope it's reflected in the play, suggests a much more fascinating dilemma. And this is at the heart of the play, which is, how do we make change? How do we deal with what we think is unjust when we disagree on how to fix it? And so I think our fascination with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which, by the way, I've been, because of the book, which I have 3 kids in college. Please buy the book, for God's sake. You know, I've given speeches now to 12 states, and I've only given, I've only given speeches in red states. I don't think that their feelings for Ruth Bader Ginsburg necessarily reflects the feelings of the coasts. Yes, I think with that, then you've fulfilled your court-ordered driver's training, and thank you very much.
So thank you, Jonathan. That was very entertaining. I know everyone really enjoyed it. I just have one question for you. Does your mother know you're here? Okay. So, no, stay with me, please. Got one more thing. On behalf of Phoenix Rotary 100, I'd like to award you this certificate for your participation in our program today. And we've made a donation in your name to one of our chosen charities, which is Family Promise of Greater Phoenix. We're helping the homeless community. And thank you so much for being here again.